But I want to thank everybody for coming out. I want to thank all of our veterans. If you don't know, veterans make up less than 1% of our population. If you go back through our history, veterans only make up 7% of the total population of the United States. So think about that. 7% taking care of the other 93. So it's out there. But want to welcome everybody. If you're able, and gentlemen, remove your caps. We're going to have the national anthem. Everybody for your thoughts and prayers. It's been a but we made it. Somebody said to me the other day, they said, "Jim, you really look good." And I said, "What, I look like crap before?" Really? Yeah. But it's been a long journey. Thanks to my wife, my daughter. So, with that being said, I want to bring up our guest speaker. I want to thank him for coming down all the way from New York to take care of this, but I'll let him do his little introductions for himself. I don't think I need to do anything else other than say, Frank Romeo.
I served in the military from 1968 to 70 in Vietnam. On August 2nd, 1969, on a search and destroy mission into Cambodia, I was separated from my unit. I was attacked by a Viet Cong unit, and that day would change my life forever. I spent a year in a hospital, and during that year, there was no welcome home. There was no welcome home for us. I struggled. My post-trauma kicked in. There was no rehabilitation. I spent a year in a hospital with all my wounds. And then I was immediately just sent out into the world. I struggled for the next 2 decades. Drug abuse, alcohol abuse, suicide. I even spent some time in prison. In the early 90s, previously I'd been diagnosed, the VA told me I was depressed. So they medicated me for 2 decades, literally. I didn't have to get drugs out in the street. The VA gave them to me. And finally, in the early 90s, I was diagnosed with PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. And finally, something made sense in my life. I realized there were other people like me out there I realized I wasn't alone. That was the main thing, I wasn't alone. And many of you here today, I'm watching, I'm looking at your hats, and you know exactly how I feel and how I felt. I discovered art as a cathartic release of my feelings and emotions. Once I realized, and I had the explanation of post-trauma and its diagnosis and treatment, I began to create artwork, and the movement of my hands to create art seemed to get these stories out. And I continually made art, and each piece of artwork came with a story. And as you see around the room, this is some of the artwork made by our traumatized veterans. And I realized that it was so important to realize this message that you're not alone, and this message of these feelings of isolation and everything that I had been feeling was so important to get out. I set out on a quest, and for the next 40 years, I traveled the country with what you see here, the Art of War exhibit. Anyone who would listen to me, I talked. And I talked about Vietnam veterans, I talked about all veterans. In my case, it was Vietnam. And as Jim said, in history, we're 7% of the population. I set out to educate the other 93%. I decided that if we're going to help veterans, we need to help their families, we need to help their children. We need to teach them about who we are and the things that we do. And for the next 40 years, I traveled around the country. I created education programs that are still used today in high schools, called The Experience of the American Soldier, where a curriculum looks at history, American history, through the eyes of the soldier. And it's used in many high schools throughout the country. 5 years ago, I declared myself homeless. I gave up everything that I had, and I went into homeless shelters. And I lived the life of a homeless veteran. I walked from Buffalo, New York, down to New York City, and out to Long Island, 750 miles, from shelter to shelter. I ate in soup kitchens, I slept in rest areas, and I documented the story of our homeless veterans. In doing so, I was documenting the story of PTSD, the emotional history of our country over 50 years, starting with me right up until the homeless veterans that I interviewed in my documentary. COVID hit, of course. I lost all my funding to continue with my project. So for 2 years, I sat and edited my film. 2 years ago, I had a premiere in New York City, at a New York City World Film Festival, and I won first prize. And the film is about, the theme of the film is about survival. You know, here we are. We're here today. How did we get here? You know, we all have different roads. You know, we all have our own personal struggles. And it doesn't have to be war. You know, 9/11, you know, car crashes. We all have a bit of trauma in us, somewhere. And this film is about survival. It's about getting from A to B. How we get there, we all have our own way of getting there. But we're going to get there. And how we get there makes all the difference.
What was the most impactful moment in your journey of creating this film?
Of the film, or just
In your journey.
in my personal journey? It was coming to the realization, I came to a low point in my life, and my wife had left me, I lost my business, my home went into foreclosure, suicide, I was on the verge of suicide, and that was a low point in my life. But coming to the realization that, okay, PTSD, okay, they gave me an explanation, I've been traumatized because of the social climate, because of the political climate for Vietnam veterans. There was no way to deal with it. There was no outlet for us. There weren't outlets like we have today. And maybe because of the Vietnam veteran, we have these kind of outlets for our veterans today. But coming to the realization that, okay, I'm not crazy, you know, I've just been injured in some way. It's a wound that's not visible. and coming to the realization that I'm going to be okay and I'm going to make it. I try to talk to young veterans today to embrace your trauma, to realize that you have something special. You've experienced something horrific that nobody else knows about. It's kind of like having a secret. You have to embrace that feeling and say, I'm a survivor. I've embraced that. I know who I am. And I try to teach that. So it took me 30 years to understand that. And so if I could help some young veteran feel that way and feel special about his own trauma, as bizarre it may sound, but if you can learn to embrace it and turn it around, now you have one up on the other guy. You have something the other guy doesn't have. Look at it.
My name is Paul Packham. I was in Vietnam in '66 and '67. I spent most of my time out in the field. Talking about the veterans system here, 51 years I put all those bad thoughts away. And, well, what's it been, Nancy? When I moved here, I talked to some veterans and I developed some shaking from Agent Orange. And they sent me to Lincolnton, and I met a man named Joey. He persuaded me to pursue it after 51 years, and just last month I was diagnosed with 75% rating for PTSD and Agent Orange. And it's never too late, so if you're a veteran and you have a problem, like me, I just never needed anything and I just never asked. But there comes a time that maybe you'll need it, and Joey is great. He persuaded me when I wanted to quit. He said, keep going, because it was a process. But I ended up getting, help, and I'm working on it. And so if you're sitting there and you're listening, and I said, well, I'm not going to ask him, you might need it someday, and it's a good thing to do.
Thank you, Frank.
You're welcome.
Frank will be around during the lunch rotation.
That's Katie, everyone. Katie lives in Asheville.
I want to recognize one veteran today. He's 104 and a half years old. He's the oldest surviving Coast Guardsman from World War II. His name is Paul Borgat. His son Tom, where's Tom at? Tom and his beautiful wife live here in Trilogy. Tom brought this to my attention. Paul was born in 1921. I know there's probably a couple here who remember Paul. He served in the Coast Guard from 1938 until 1945, doing convoy duty in the North Atlantic and the Mediterranean. If you were there, if you've seen anything about the North Atlantic and the Mediterranean between 1938 and basically 1943, the Germans were taking a toll on shipping. These guys were the reason why you could go safely from New York City or from Charleston, South Carolina to Europe to fight, was because of these Coast Guardsmen taking care of doing convoy duty back and forth, taking out submarines that the Germans would just wait on ships and just take out 2 or 3 ships at a time. So, without further ado, we'll be going to our service songs. If you can, stand during your service song. If you know the words, sing along. If you don't, hum like I do. A couple years ago, a friend of mine made something for me that it's too big to hang in my garage. And so he get out there, he made it for me, and I'll show it to you here in a second. But this year, I added the names of those veterans here at Trilogy that we've lost in the 8 years that we've been here. So, if you remember, or if there's somebody that we've missed, I've missed, let me know. Because Robert Copeland, United States Army. Jerry Larry Ramsey, United States Army. Ollie Snyder-Jans, United States Army. Paul Shadden, United States Army. Scott Coverdale, United States Air Force. John Gray, United States Air Force. Hal Workman, United States Navy. Mike Stetchkin, United States Navy. Brian Schaefer, United States Navy. So